novelist, right? And most of her life she spent in China, and she has written. She won the important part is she won the Pulitzer Prize in 1932, right? Given for, and in 1938 she was even awarded Nobel Prize in Literature, right? So Nobel Prize in Literature, Nobel Prize, you mean like she is an awesome writer, right? So we will be doing that what she has written. So you should be happy that you are reading stories written by such eminent writers, right? And the fact of the matter, she was the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. She was the first American woman, right? So that again, obviously, you can understand that we are reading a good story now. I will be taking up first the gist, the general points, and I will take up that PPT. The first thing about general points, it so happened we are reading about the characters. There are not many characters in the story. The central character is Dr. Sadao. Now he belongs to Japan. So Dr. Sadao and his wife Hana. So Dr. Sadao and Hana in Japan, they are Japanese, right? They were enjoying the breeze of the sea from the veranda of their home. So they were enjoying, they were standing outside, they were enjoying that breeze which was coming. Their house was on a seashore, and they were enjoying, they were getting the pleasure of the natural breeze. Now, what are the names? Dr. Sadao and Hana. So we understand Dr. Sadao was a doctor. Hana was his wife. Now, when they were standing, they saw something flung out of the sea. They saw that something was thrown out of the sea, something was thrown out by the sea, something came out of the sea. So you have to remember flung, the word, right? Flung coming from the word fling, to throw, right? And they realized, they went close to that thing, whichever was flung out of the sea, and what they saw was he was actually a man who staggered, right? Who actually tried to walk, which is called staggered, and then he fell down. His face was buried in the sand, right? So first they saw something was flung out of the sea. Then they noticed that it was actually a man who staggered. He tried to stand up and walk, but he fell down and his face was buried in the sand. It was already dark, evening time, right? There was no one on the seashore that time. Dr. Sadao, being a doctor also, and they were good human beings also, Dr. Sadao and his wife Hana, they rushed to the spot, and what did they see? They saw an injured man with gunshot on his back. Because when he fell down, obviously he fell down, that his back was visible, his face was buried in the sand, and what Dr. Sadao saw, that the injured man had gunshot on his back. Now, gunshot on the back means naturally the person must be trying to escape. Then they saw the cap the man was wearing, and they understood the man was actually an American soldier who got imprisoned, and then he got imprisoned, and then finally he was trying to run away naturally, that he was shot at the back. So they understood that the man was an American prisoner of war. He must have been captured by Japan army, right? And then he must have tried to escape. So when he was trying to escape, he must have got gunshot on his back, right? And then he must have been, something must have happened, that he must have fallen in the sea, and then he was thrown out of the sea. Now he was in Japan, and Japan and America were at war with each other at that time. So Japan and America at that time were at war with each other. So then Dr. Sadao and Hana were Japanese. What they saw was that he was an American prisoner of war. How did they find out? Because he was wearing the cap of American defense. And they understood that he was an American prisoner of war because obviously he was having gunshot on his back. Now, as America and Japan were at war with each other, Dr. Sadao and Hana hesitated in helping the injured soldier, obviously, right? Because they were Japanese. Japan and America were at war with each other, so they hesitated in helping the injured soldier because he was American prisoner of war. So what did they decide first? They decided to throw him back into the sea, right? But then nobody moved, right? Neither Dr. Sadao did nor Hana. Then they decided, okay, fine, let us hand him over to the police. But that also they could not do because the man was not whole. As given in the chapter, he was an injured man, right? And Dr. Sadao, being a doctor, it was his duty, right, not to let him die at the hands of, obviously, because he was an American prisoner of war. But then it was not correct at that time to hand him over in such an injured condition. So, what options they had? Number one, they thought to throw him back into the sea. They did not do so. Then they decided to hand him over to the police, then and there itself. They did not do so. Finally, they decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. Right? So now you have to understand the chapter. As I said, don't try to mug up, right? You won't be able to cram up the answers. Not possible at all. Try to understand. So now that as you are doing, so do remember Dr. Sadao and Anna are good human beings. Dr. Sadao is a doctor also. Now they were simply standing on the veranda of their home when they saw something was flung out of the sea. Then they realized that that something was actually a man who staggered and then fell down. His face was buried in the sand. It was already dark, no one was on the seashore. So Dr. Sadao and Hana, they rushed to the spot and they saw an injured man with gunshot on his back. So gunshot on the back, obviously he must have been the prisoner of war. And which prisoner? American, definitely, because he was wearing the cap of America. America and Japan were at war with each other. Dr. Sadao and Hana were hesitant in helping the injured soldier. So at first they decided to throw him back into the sea. Then they decided to hand him over to the police. And finally they decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police because they were good citizens also. Right? So now they brought him home. So when they brought him home, after that, in the I have taken up these points just as given in the chapter. So now we move on to Sadao's childhood first of all. That is now the flashback. How was Sadao's childhood? So Sadao's childhood, it was a lonely childhood. His father never played or spent time with him. So he had a lonely childhood, right? He used to climb the trees and most of his time was on, because house was on seashore only. He used to play. His father was not engaged in playing with him or, spending time with him. But it was not like that he was a bad father. He ensured that Sadao got good education and become a doctor. So that was the aim of his father. He also sent Sadao to America for higher studies. And Sadao returned as an excellent doctor and efficient scientist also, having perfection in treating wounds. So he became perfect doctor, he became excellent doctor, he became scientist also, right, finding out the things how to do, and he became perfect in treating wounds. So Sadao had a lonely childhood. His father never played, never spent time with him, but he ensured that Sadao got good education and become a doctor. He also sent Sadao to America for higher studies. Sadao returned as an excellent doctor and an efficient scientist, having perfection in treating wounds. Right, so the first one you have done is, what was the first one you have done? You saw encounter with enemy. Right, the second one you are doing Sadao's childhood. After that, we will read about Sadao's marriage with Hana. Now, Sadao met Hana in America. You know that Sadao went to America for higher studies to become an excellent doctor and an efficient scientist also. There only he met Hana, but he ensured that she was a Japanese before expressing his liking for her. This shows Dr. Sadao was a true patriot. He loved Japan. He was a he that means he was a true patriot, right? You know, patriot who loves his own nation. So when Sadao met Hana, he started liking her, but first he ensured that Hana was a Japanese. He took immense pride in being a Japanese. Also, he was an obedient son. He returned to Japan, sought his father's permission, and married Hana in a truly Japanese way. Right? This shows that how Dr. Sadao was such a good human being also, a good and responsible son also, a patriot also. So, like when a character sketch is coming up, you need not mug up the answers. You have to derive from these incidents. So now we understand that he was an obedient and responsible son. We understand that he was a true Japanese. We also understand that he believed in Japanese rituals, culture, customs, and traditions. Alright, so what is the first one you have done? First one you did was encounter with enemy. Right, so in enemy, so when they saw the man who staggered and fell down, his face was buried in the sand. They rushed to the spot, saw an injured man with gunshot on his back. When they saw the cab, they understood he was an American prisoner of war. America and Japan were at war with each other, so Dr. Sadao and Hana were hesitant in helping the injured soldier. So first they thought that they should throw him back into the sea. Then they decided, okay, let us give him to the police. Then finally they decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. Right? So a responsible doctor, right? A good wife. Sadao's childhood. So it was a lonely childhood. His father, although never spent time with him, but he ensured that Sadao got good education and become a doctor. He also sent Sadao to America for higher studies. Sadao returned as an excellent doctor and efficient scientist, having perfection in treating wounds. This line you do remember, having perfection in treating wounds. Why, that you will understand very soon. Okay, so do remember that he was having perfection in treating wounds, infections. Right? Then Sadao's marriage with Hana. So he met Hana in America. He ensured that she was a Japanese before expressing his liking for her. He took immense pride in being a Japanese. He was an obedient son also. He returned to Japan, sought his father's permission, and married Hana in a truly Japanese way. Right? Now we move on. Now we come to the present time. Now we know that Dr. Sadao and Hana brought the injured soldier to their home. But he was an American soldier, and Japan and America were at war with each other. Now there were two servants who were working in the home of Dr. Sadao. Right? Now when Dr. Sadao brought the injured American soldier home, they were reluctant to help him. They did not want to, they were unwilling to help him. Right? Why? They were scared also. Right? So first they argued. What did they say? They said the man was arrested. Right? The man must have been arrested, shot at the back. Then he was injured by the sea rocks also, which meant that he was destined to die. So Dr. Sadao should not try to save his life. So first of all, they argued like that. They said that it is in his destiny to die. God wants him to die. Why to save him? So how did they argue? They said that the man was arrested, he was shot at the back, he was then injured by the sea rocks also. Right? It meant that he was destined to die. But actually they were scared that they would be arrested by the Japanese police if they continued their job in the home where American prisoner of war was given shelter. So both of them left the job. Right? This is a gist I'm telling. Then when we take up in detail, then you will understand even more. First you get comfortable with the storyline. Is that okay? So servants fear. So there were two servants. right? There was actually one maid servant was there, Yumi, and then there was one gardener also. So both of them, they first of all they argued. They said that Dr. Sadao should not try to save the enemy because he was the enemy. He was American prisoner of war. But in fact, they were scared that they would be arrested by the Japanese police if they continued their job in the home where American prisoner of war was given shelter. So the first thing you have done right now is encounter with the enemy. After that, the second thing you have done, Sadao's childhood. After Sadao's childhood, the third thing is marriage of Dr. Sadao and Hana. The fourth is servants' fear. Right, so do remember servants have played an important role over here, because then you will understand the next point. Now Hana's role. So we know that Hana, wife of Dr. Sadao. So what was her role? So now we come to Hana's role. So Hana was a loving and caring wife. She supported Dr. Sadao at every step. She supported Dr. Sadao's decision to bring the injured American soldier home and treat him. Right? So like a true life partner, she supported Dr. Sadao's decisions. When the servants left the job, she helped Dr. Sadao in the operation. Actually, what happened that both the servants, they refused to help in the operation. So Hana herself helped Dr. Sadao in the operation, and she was allergic to chloroform. She in fact vomited also. She controlled her vomiting, and after that when the operation was done, she went out and then vomited. She was allergic to chloroform, but still she remained with Dr. Sadao when the operation went on. So she was a dutiful and responsible wife. So now again, when Hana's role, Hana's character sketch, anything like that comes, anything in the form of statement, assertion, anything, whatever comes, when you know the character of these people, you can answer any question. So what we understand about Hana, we understand that she was a loving wife, responsible wife, right, caring wife. She supported Dr. Sadao like a real life partner. She supported Dr. Sadao in his decision to bring the injured American soldier home and treat him. Even she helped Dr. Sadao in the operation, although she was allergic to chloroform. Right? So she was a responsible wife. She was a dutiful wife. Right? She knew that what was her responsibility. Right? So the first thing you have done, encounter with the enemy. Second one, Sadao's childhood. Third one, Dr. Sadao and Hana's marriage. Next one, servant's fear. And next one, Hana's role. Now we move on to the general. Now general was actually the general of the army of Japan. Right? Now he was suffering, general, right, of Japan. This general of Japan was suffering from an infection which was treated by Dr. Sadao every time. Only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Now you remember I told you that, do remember he got perfection in cleaning the wounds, in treating those wounds. Only Dr. Sadao knew that. So the general of Japan was suffering from an infection which was treated by Dr. Sadao every time. And naturally, he did not want to offend Dr. Sadao at any cost. Offend, to make angry, to annoy. Now remember that this general was a very cruel person actually. When you will read in detail, you will understand that he was even very harsh to his wife. He was even harsh, naturally you can understand he was harsh to his wife. Then how rude he must have been to the prisoners of war. But he never wanted to offend Dr. Sadao. So what we understand, he was a selfish person. Right? Because his own interest was there, therefore he did not want to offend Dr. Sadao. He feared that Dr. Sadao might cause him harm during the treatment. So he was scared that Dr. Sadao might cause any harm during the treatment. So he was scared of that, right? So he was a selfish fellow. Now when Dr. Sadao told him about the presence of injured American soldier in his home, remember that Dr. Sadao was a true patriot. Dr. Sadao, you already know that he took immense pride in being a Japanese. So he told the general that he had American prisoner of war in his home after the operation, right? After saving his life. But he was still in his home. Dr. Sadao told the general, like a true patriot, that he had injured American soldier in his home. The general promised that he would send his armed men to get rid of that enemy. So for 3 nights, Dr. Sadao waited that general would send somebody, his armed men, right, some soldiers, to pick up that American prisoner of war. Now, do remember that those 3 nights Dr. Sadao was not able to sleep because on one hand, he was having that feeling also, that he was scared that what would happen to that American soldier of war, prisoner of war. So every day he would be, coming immediately. Every morning he would rush to the room to see, and every morning he would find him alive and in his own room only. So then the general assured that he would send his armed men to get rid of that enemy, but he was so much obsessed with his own infection, he never bothered to fulfill his promise. He was least concerned who was there at Dr. Sadao's home. Why? Because he did not want to, trouble Dr. Sadao, make him angry, annoy him, offend him. Why? Because he was scared that Dr. Sadao might cause him some harm during the treatment. So obviously he lacked patriotism. Who? The general. He was irresponsible, he was careless also, he was selfish also. Right? See, we do understand that this general who promised that he would send his armed men to get rid of that enemy because Dr. Sadao could not keep him forever, isn't it? Because he was an American prisoner of war. And already a war was going on between America and Japan. So Dr. Sadao wanted General's help, but General did not help him. General lacked patriotism and was irresponsible and careless. So what you have done so far, you have done encounter with the enemy, you have done Sadao's childhood, then Dr. Sadao and Hana's marriage, then we come to the present, then we read about servant's fear, then we read about Hana's role, and now General's obsession, self-obsession. Right, we are moving to the conclusion of the story. Remember, this is only the gist as we are doing. Dr. Sadao took now final decision. Dr. Sadao waited for 3 nights. Then Dr. Sadao took the final decision because he could not keep the American soldier of war for a very long time in his home. So he took a final decision. What the decision he took was, Dr. Sadao was a responsible doctor, and so he had brought an injured American soldier in his home to treat him despite the war between America and Japan. So that was his responsibility as a doctor. But he told the general also that he had American prisoner of war in his home. That showed that he was a patriot also. He was a true patriot, loved his nation. He even asked help from the general. General did not help him. So general only assured to help without fulfilling his promise. Dr. Sadao obviously could not keep the enemy in his home for a very long time. So he was left with no other option but to let the enemy escape. Right, because obviously now he had no other option. So he rose now. You see in rat trap what happened? The man, the peddler rose above, he was no longer a rat. He rose high up to the level of the captain. Now here also Dr. Sadao rose high up, leaving those boundaries of nations and wars and hatred, right? He left everything, and what he did was he arranged a boat, he kept few clothes and food in it, and gave a torch to the American soldier to blow if help was needed. He kept on waiting as the American soldier of war escaped in that boat. So Dr. Sadao kept on looking if the torch was blown, but then finally it is assumed that this American soldier of war got some American boat, got some American help, and his life was saved. Like this, Dr. Sadao's decision shows better side of the humanity where kindness is much, much above man-made borders and boundaries. right? So this is obviously one of the most important questions. It can come in any way. Dr. Sadav's character sketch is the most important question in this story. But I repeat, the questions are coming in a totally different way. But you must know the character of the person. The Dr. Sadav, who was a responsible doctor, that is why he saved the life of the American prisoner of war. Although there was a war between America and Japan, he was a true patriot. How do we know? There are two things we know. Number one, he first of all, when he started liking Hana, so he ensured that she was a Japanese, and then only he expressed his liking for her. After that, he married Hana in truly Japanese way only, right? Japanese tradition and custom. So he was a true patriot. He told the general also about the presence of American prisoner of war in his home. He was a true patriot. He also asked help from the general to help him get rid of the enemy, but the general was selfish, irresponsible, careless. He only assured to help, he did not fulfill his promise. Dr. Sadav could not keep the enemy in his home for a very long time. So finally, he rose above the boundaries of man-made boundaries and borders and between nations and all those problems of war and everything. He arranged a boat. He kept few clothes and food in it and gave a torch to the American soldier to blow in case he needed help. But he was happy that the torch was not blown. This shows that American soldier must have got some help from America. So his life was saved. So like this, Dr. Sadav's decision shows better side of the humanity where kindness is much above man-made borders and boundaries. Right? So like this, now I'll quickly take up in the form of very short questions so that you understand the chapter, and then I'll wind up by showing you the PPT, and after that we will wind up. Not like this. I think I'll first show you that PPT so that you understand better. Let me shift to the PPT. Okay, so I hope you can see this now, and I will move to the PPT. Now, this is the enemy, Pearl Esbug, gist of the chapter and question answer. You'll understand. Pearl Esbug, I've already told you, first American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, in the form of short question answers, we will do, right? So, just try to understand, and we'll take up again. It's not like that we will not take up. This is just a overview of the chapter. So, where was Dr. Sadav's house situated? The Dr. Sadav's full name was Dr. Sadav Huki. His house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast, as I told you, on seashore. Right? So it was on seashore, it was on the Japanese coast that his house was built. Number one. Number two, as a boy, what did he love to do? So as a boy, he loved to climb the pine trees. He supported himself on his bare feet. So as a boy, he loved to climb the trees. What was the chief concern of Sadav's father? Sadav's education was his father's chief concern. Right? So because Sadav's father wanted him to become a doctor. So where was Dr. Sadav's house situated? It was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, what did Sadav love to do? To climb the pine trees. What was the chief concern of Sadav's father? It was so that he become a doctor. Now, why was Sadav sent to America? He was sent to America so that he could become an excellent doctor. Let me take up over here so that you understand the question which I have left, right? First you look over here, then you will understand. At what age Sadav was sent to America? So he was 22 at that time. Why was Sadav sent to America? So that he could learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. For how long he stayed at America? 8 years. He returned at 30. So at 22 years of age he went to America and he returned when he became of 30 years. So now you will understand these questions. So where was his house situated? On the Japanese coast. As a boy, he loved to climb pine trees. Chief concern of Sadao's father was his education. He was sent to America when he was 22 years. Why was he sent to America? So that he could learn everything about surgery and medicine. And he stayed in America for 8 years. He returned when he became of 30 years. Right? If you are getting any doubt, then unmute yourself and ask. Then as we move on, how did Sadao become famous as? So Sadao became famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist also. Right? So now you remember that he not only became an excellent surgeon, he also became an efficient scientist. Then how was Dr. Sadao a doctor also and a scientist also? So he was a doctor, definitely right. He went to study that. It's about all about surgery and medicine. On top of that, he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. So he was a scientist also. So he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. So he became an expert in that, and this is the problem. This was an infection that general was suffering from. So only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Now, why was Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? So when the war broke out between America and Japan, Dr. Sadao was not sent outside with the troops, with the soldiers, because general could need him any time for his treatment. We again come to understand that general was a selfish person, right? So he did not send Dr. Sadao anywhere. Dr. Sadao could have helped those soldiers during the war, but he did not send Dr. Sadao because he needed Dr. Sadao for his own help. Right? So one more example that general was selfish. For how long Sadao stayed at America? For 8 years. How did Sadao become famous as an excellent doctor and an efficient scientist? How was he a doctor as well as scientist? So he became, naturally he learned all about surgery and medicine, and also he became an expert in treating wounds to render wounds entirely clean. Why was Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? It was because general was suffering from an infection and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Now, where had Dr. Sadao met Hana? At America. So that you will be reading in the next part. So far, any problem is coming up? You will understand his house was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, he loved to climb pine trees. The chief concern of Sadao's father was his education. At 22 years of age, he was sent to America. He was sent to America to learn everything about surgery and medicine. Sadao became then the next one. For how long he stayed at America? So for 8 years. How did he become famous as? An excellent doctor and an efficient scientist. How was he scientist also? Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. Why was Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? Because general was suffering from an infection and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Is that okay? So far, any problem is coming up, then ask.
Ma'am,
Yes?
both of them, Hana and Dr. Sadao, graduated together.
They graduated together, but Hana did not graduate in medicine and surgery.
Okay, ma'am.
So she was not studying about that.
Okay,
Right, so
ma'am.
they met. It's actually in the house of American people that they met, but Hana was not a doctor. Now,
Okay.
right. So where had Dr. Sadao met Hana? At America. So he met Hana at an American professor's house. Then what had Dr. Sadao ensured before expressing his feelings for Hana? So as we know now, he ensured that she was a Japanese. Right? So this is an example that he was a patriot. Then what unusual did Dr. Sadao and Hana see one day as they were standing outside their house? What unusual thing did they see? They saw something flung out of the sea. So they actually knew now that it was a man because the man staggered and then fell down. His face was buried in the sand. So what had Dr. Sadao ensured before expressing his feelings for Hana? That she was a Japanese. What unusual did Dr. Sadao and Hana see one day as they were standing outside their house? They saw something was flung out of the sea. And when they came a bit closer, then they saw that it was a man, right, who staggered and then fell down. His face was buried in the sand, right? Then 13, 14, 15 will take up after when you read this, right? So now, what was Dr. Sadao's opinion about the identity of the stranger before going close to him? So Dr. Sadao actually thought that he was a fisherman, perhaps washed from his boat. Perhaps he fell from his boat and he was a fisherman only, perhaps a Japanese fisherman. How did Sadao make out the identity of the stranger? So he made out through his face and rags he was wearing that American naturally wore uniform only. Later on the cap, U.S. Navy was written on it. So he understood that it was an actually American prisoner of war. What did Dr. Sadao observe upon examining the stranger? So Dr. Sadao observed that the man had been shot and not treated. It was bad luck that even the rocks had struck the wound. So already there was a gunshot on his back. He must have jumped into the sea, and then sea rocks also had wounded him badly. And you remember that servants argued. So servants said the same thing. Servants told that he was arrested, right? Then he was shot at the back. He fell into the sea. The sea rocks also injured him. So the man should die, right? So now, as we see these questions, what was Dr. Sadao's opinion about the identity of the stranger before going close to him? So Dr. Sadao thought that he was a fisherman, perhaps washed from the boat. How did Sadao make out the identity of the stranger? So he saw his face, rags are his dirty clothes, and more so with the cap he was wearing on which US Navy was written. So naturally he was an American, shot at the back, so American prisoner of war. What did Dr. Sadao observe upon examining the stranger? So Dr. Sadao observed that the man not only was having gunshot on his back, but even the wound was, in a very bad condition because sea rocks must have wounded it, must have struck the wound. And you know that Dr. Sadao was an expert in treating wounds, right? So now Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, he loved to climb pine trees. The chief concern of Sadao's father was his education. He went to America at 22 years of age. He went to America to learn all about surgery and medicine. He stayed at America for 8 years. He became famous as an excellent doctor and efficient scientist. How was he a scientist also? Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render the wounds entirely clean. Why was Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? Because the general was suffering from an infection and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Where had Dr. Sadao met Hana at America? So he had met at an American professor's home. What had Dr. Sadao ensured before expressing his feelings for Hana? That she was a Japanese. After that, and he was an obedient son also, right? So he returned, he took permission from his father, and the marriage took place in a truly Japanese tradition and custom. Then what unusual did Dr. Sadao and Hana saw one day? They saw that something was flung out of the sea. Then they realized that it was a man who staggered and then fell down. His face was buried in sand. Dr. Sadao's initial opinion was that he was some fisherman who must have fallen from his boat. How did Dr. Sadao make out the identity of the stranger? So through his face and rags, and also the cap he was wearing on which US Navy was written. What did Dr. Sadao observe? So he observed that the man had a gunshot on his back, number one, and secondly, even the sea rocks had injured him badly because they had struck the wounds again and again. Is that okay? So much so far is clear to you? Anything you want to ask, then to ask. So I'll just take up just one more slide, right, so that you don't get too much of pressure also. Tomorrow I want to take the class, so you all let me decide one time and let me know. Because tomorrow is Sunday, so decide in the morning if you can take the class. Now, how did Dr. Sadao try to control the bleeding of the wounded man? This is the last one I'm taking up, this slide. So, how did Dr. Sadao try to control the bleeding of the wounded man? Because, as you know, that he had a gunshot on his back, and on top, sea rocks had even struck the wound very bad. He packed the wound with the sea moss that was spread on the beach, because at that time he was on the seashore, right? Immediate help was to pack the wound with the sea moss that was spread on the beach. Now, dilemma of Dr. Sadao and Hana when they encountered the enemy. This dilemma you have already done in that PDF, that America and Japan were at war. So Dr. Sadao and Hana, when they discovered that the injured man was American prisoner of war, they were hesitant to help him. First, they thought to throw him back into the sea. They could not do so. Then they thought to hand him over to the police. But finally, they decided to treat him and then hand him over to the police. So this is then. This I'll correct. Now, what was the reaction of the servants when Dr. Sadao and Hana brought the US soldier home? So first of all, in a nutshell here I have given, you have to remember, number one, that they said that it was wrong to save him because they said that God wanted him to die. They said that he was first of all arrested, then he was shot at the back, then he fell into the sea, then sea rocks injured him. The man should die, right? But actually they were frightened that America and Japan were at war, so Japanese police would arrest them for helping American prisoner of war. Right? So what did Hana ask Yumi to do? As I told you, there were two servants. One was Yumi and one was a gardener. So Hana asked the maid servant to wash the wounded soldier. She said to wash, clean up, so that operation could take place. Yumi refused to comply with the order of Hana. Yumi refused because she had never washed a white man, means an American, and did not want to wash so dirty one at all. Right, so Yumi totally refused. She said that she won't wash an American one, and also he was so dirty. Then the last one that I'm taking up, what made Hana succumb to the servant's decision? So Hana did not force any of them, neither Yumi, who was the maid servant, and the gardener. She did not, whatever they said, she agreed because the fear that servants might report something against her and Dr. Sadao to the police. Therefore, she did not force both of them. Because even she was scared, right? Because America and Japan were at war with each other. Right? So, how did Sadao try to control the bleeding of the wounded man? By packing the wound with the sea moss that was spread on the beach. Dilemma of Dr. Sadao and Hana when they encountered the enemy. So there was a war between America and Japan, and when Dr. Sadao and Hana discovered that the injured man was an American prisoner of war, they were reluctant to help him. First, they decided to throw him back into the sea. Then they decided to give him to the police then and there. And finally, they decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. Reaction of the servants when Dr. Sadao and Hana brought the US soldier home, they were naturally, first they said, they argued. They said that Dr. Sadao should not save him at all, right? Because he was arrested, he was shot at the back, he fell into the sea rocks injured him, he should die. but actually they were scared that Japanese police would arrest them. What did Hana ask Yumi to do? So she asked Yumi to wash the wounded soldier. Why did Yumi refuse to comply with the order of Hana? Because Yumi had never washed an American person, and that also such a dirty one. Right, so these are the 20 short questions I'm taking up. I hope you are understanding. Just a quick brief and then I'll be ending up the class. Still, if you get any doubt, you can ask me anytime. Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, he loved to climb the pine trees. Chief concern of Sadao's father was his education. He was sent to America at 22 years of age. Why was he sent to America? So that he could learn all about surgery and medicine. How long he stayed in America? 8 years. Right? He returned when he became of 30 years. How did he become famous as? As an excellent doctor and efficient scientist. How a scientist also? Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render the wounds entirely clean. Then Sadao was not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war because the general was suffering from an infection and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Where had Dr. Sadao met Hana at America? At an American professor's home. Dr. Sadao ensured that Hana was a Japanese before expressing his feelings for her. Then Dr. Sadao and Hana saw that something was flung out of the sea. They noticed that it was a man who staggered and then fell down. His face was buried in the sand. Dr. Sadao first thought that he was a fisherman, right? And then Dr. Sadao saw the face and the rags and finally the cap on which US Navy was written. So he could make out that he was an American prisoner of war. How a prisoner of war? Because there was a gunshot on his back. Remember that, okay? Because it can come in, any reason or assertion or something like that. And Dr. Sadao observed that the man not only had a gunshot on his back, but even the wound was badly struck by the sea rocks. Then Dr. Sadao tried to control the bleeding of the wounded man by packing the wound with the sea moss which was spread on the beach. Dilemma of Dr. Sadao and Hana, because America and Japan were at war with each other, and Dr. Sadao and Hana saw that it was an American prisoner of war, so they were hesitant to help him. So first they decided to throw him back into the sea, then they decided to give him to the police then and there, and finally they decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. Reaction of the servants: number one, they argued. They said that the man was arrested, shot at the back, fell into the sea, he was struck by the sea rocks also, he should die. But actually they were scared that Japanese police would arrest them for helping any American prisoner of war. What did Hana ask Yumi to do? She asked Yumi to wash the wounded soldier. Yumi refused to comply with the order of Hana because she did not want to wash American soldier, and that also such a dirty one. And lastly, you do remember, as we have done, that Hana had to succumb to her decision. Hana could not force Yumi and the gardener also because she was scared that both of the servants can go out and tell the police, and then Hana and Dr. Sadao could be in trouble. So she did not say anything at all. Right, so here I'll be ending up. Tomorrow I want to complete the chapter so that you are ready with the test. So 20 questions we have done. If you face any problem, then let me know. I'll share the screenshot of these 20 questions in the group. You ask me if you have any problem. Is that okay? So we'll be winding up the class. Let me know if you have any problem. I repeat, I am taking up as I wish, right? But you tell me what you want, right? So here we will wind up the class.